Good few people already online. Great, a few people will be coming along in the next few minutes. But so let's start the Roadshow, the Space Hubs Network. Sun Roadshow is here to talk about the moon, the lunar economy. This afternoon we've got some experts, as you can see from the title card right there. So we've got Simon Drake, who'll be talking in a couple of minutes about the Lunar Resources Registry and how that will dynamize the lunar economy, get people working. And then at 5 p.m., so in 1 hour, Carlos Utrilla from Plus Ultra Space Outposts will tell us all about the work he's doing on the lunar economy in terms of communication and the way he sees the economy moving forward for the moon. And then to wrap up at 6 p.m. in 2 hours, I'll just tell you about business support for the Sun Project, because for those of you who don't know, the Sun Project is there to help space startups progress their business and get support in the business side, helping them create, incubate, scale up. Okay, so that's all from me. I'll see you back at 6 p.m. And I now hand over to Simon Drake from the Lunar Resources Registry. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon Chambers, for the introduction, and thanks Space Hub Networks for hosting this event. Yes, I'm Simon Drake. I'm co-founder of Lunar Resources Registry. What Lunar Resources is, and I'll just call it LRR for short, is a registry for the moon. How this came about as a concept was, from a business point of view, it was, I was looking around at different new space resources focused startups, and I could see that there's going to be a problem where there is a kind of a moon rush happening, but there needs to be a bit of chaos. The chaos needs to be project managed in a way. So for myself as a business creator, it was a perfect opportunity. Together with my business partner, Kevin, we pitched it to our local European Space Agency Business Incubation Center. They supported us, they support us. We are part of a business incubation center, and that has enabled us to take the concept and build out an actual functioning registry. So I'm just going to go through the presentation and then a map of what the registry is and where we are, where we're going, and why the moon is important for all of us at the moment. So I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Can you see the familiar PowerPoint slide?
Yes. Yep.
All right. Awesome. I'll just put on the slideshow. Okay, so on the right, you see that's an example of, or a screenshot of our current map, which is, I had someone compare it yesterday to a Google kind of Earth look and feel, and it is. You know, we took the usability of the Google Earth and made a moon map out of it, and that forms the basis of our registry. So that, just keep that in mind as we go through, because this is for us what's very important is a registry has to be a visual tool and platform for people to use. So why back to the moon? There's enough action going on from the space agencies and the big aerospace space companies to be able to detect that there is movement towards the moon. It's a question of what are they doing there, how are they doing it, in what stages, and what's the outcome. So for myself as a entrepreneur, the question is, well, where's the opportunity? So when we talk about opportunities in business and as an entrepreneur, it really means that you're going to end up investing money in something, and then you need to know what the return is. So for me, the return is the ability to go to the moon, explore and extract something of value. So a space agency might be able to say, oh, we're going to the moon for science or whatever. In my case, I have to look ahead and say, okay, where's the value going to come from? Because we have investors in one of our companies. If we feed money into Lunar Resources Registry, we need to know, you know, what is the value? And my investment thesis on the moon is, it goes like this. for all the rare earth elements that go into making our digital lives, we're faced with the point where we can either dig up rainforests and make open cut mines to extract exotic metals, or we can go to the moon. Now, going to the moon is no picnic, but for the first time in our life, with the lowering cost of launch, the miniaturization of technology, and more infrastructure getting ready to go there as well, we're now in a position where mining is becoming a feasible objective. We're not there yet, but there's enough activity to pinpoint, well, it's not to pinpoint, there's enough activity to kind of map out a path that is leading towards extraction of materials. Now, as one gets more interested in the moon, you begin to understand that it is a treasure, but it's also very alluring, and there's so much more to learn about it, which we'll go into soon. So, anyway, on the screen here, you can see that there's NASA is going. They've launched a whole program. The space economy in perspective, on the left-hand side is, these are big, bold estimates about the space economy from the big investment banks, how they see it. This is in trillions on the left. And on the right, we've got more lunar focus figures. For example, Northern Sky Research, I think the last figure I found was 42 billion over 10 years. And PricewaterhouseCoopers puts it at 142 billion. So there's enough research out there to start to circle in an economy of value. And in that economy of value, you can start to say, okay, well, where does what I do fit into that? So for us, it is, we're not involved. On the far right, you can see 1, 2, 3. We're not transportation, although that might be something we want to get into anyway. We are more about number 3, resource utilization. So just to put it in context, the space economy is growing. We've all seen that. The moon is the next location, and it's substantially smaller than the space economy, but that's fair enough. But it will always be growing, and there is missions already going there, which means there's activity. Now, for us, a lunar resources registry solves many issues. So on the far left, we have the United Nations, who, they have to work out, they've already had their outer space treaties. Countries have different policies. But as you have more commercial activity going to the surface of the moon, it's going to get a bit more crowded. You have NASA and Artemis Accords leading the way, but on the other side, your other space agencies saying, we're going there as well. On the lower left, you have terrestrial mining. I look at terrestrial mining as the template for lunar mining, because they're the ones that actually every year they have to allocate about 10% of their budget to exploration to find new reserves of the metals that go into the things that make our digital life a lot more exciting, that find the metals that build out the digital infrastructure, electric vehicles, and so on. And then on the far right, we have the space entrepreneurs. They need to know that where there's a location to explore and extract, that they have some kind of commercial right to be there. So for us, a registry, it takes all these factors. It takes space law, treaties, policies, commercial goals, the process of due diligence required by a mining company or a space mining company that has to go through due diligence in order to get investment. So we're trying to solve problems and say, okay, as a registry, if you want to go to the moon, talk to us and we'll help you work out a location and some kind of way of promoting that location as yours, as opposed to people not having a location. Because back to mining companies, it's all about the location of a resource and how they secured that location by whether they lease it or buy it in order to begin operations. So our business is as a service. So we first and foremost a registry of actual lunar missions and operations, which is probably the most interesting part that we've been through in our development, is understanding who is already there, what's been going on. Then we started building maps of the moon, and then we started building map registration frameworks, which is more like the legal, a rules-based approach to what you can do on the moon, what you can't do on the moon based on existing treaties. As I said before, we're part of an BIC in Germany. We've partnered with Lunar Station, an MIT spin-off. They do our lunar terrain analysis. We just focus on the registry side and research in the background. Final point, the race for the moon is heating up. And when newer high resolution data is available, it will take it to the next level. For example, a lot of the maps we look at of resources of the moon, they might have like a 1 pixel equals 1 kilometer. Now, if you look at the Earth observation resolution, it's a lot better. But when more lunar missions go to the moon and send back more high resolution data, you get a bit of a clearer picture of what's there and where. And this changes the marketplace for registrations considerably. Because at the moment, we're kind of not flying blind, but we are using data from missions that are sometimes, 20 years old. How we see the cislunar value chain is that here we are now. As I said before, there's been data about the moon. There's pretty good data since the 1990s. We're here, we're trying to work out registrations. Soon, hopefully within the next 5 years, there'll be more exploration projects. And then after that, more infrastructure-based projects, and hopefully in the 2030s, extraction operations. From extraction operations, then you start getting processing of extracted material, and then onwards to having a cislunar economy where you go from exploring the data to working out where the value is, to exploring areas, to making infrastructure to support operations, extracting, and then once you start extracting material, then you can put it in storage, or it becomes part of what they call a cislunar economy. At this stage, the key products seem to be extracting oxygen from regolith. My favorite is platinum group metals, for a lot of different reasons. But I think at this stage, we kind of understand that there is value on the moon. We're not physically there yet, and the market is still self-assembling itself. And the most interesting thing for this, cislunar economy is there's so much opportunity in helping unlock the puzzle of where the real value is. Some people say, oh, well, there's water on the moon. Well, that's great, but it costs a lot of energy to extract it, and the locations, in the polar shadowed regions, deep in craters. So there's lots more mysteries to be found out, lots more opportunity to encounter. It's an exciting field to be working towards. Our function is we see this as a market, and we see what we offer as a service, which is a registration. So we see what we do as a service to space agencies and space companies, that we can behave a bit like a traffic cop, where people come to us and say, we want to go here, and we say, okay, fine, well, we'll reserve that in a registry for you, so that no one else is going to land next to you or on top of you. On the other side, we also understand that a functioning market, with all its volatility and ups and downs, booms, busts, is important, because it enables more participants to get into the market. And we also understand that the big players, like the investment banks and the miners and energy companies, they are going to be the marketplace for these large operations. So we want to weigh up their needs and the needs from a regulation point of view of the space agencies and space companies. Back to the value chain. The value chain is quite long and complicated. and our focus is in this section here. It's more towards the lunar mining registration, because there's quite a few academics and new companies focusing on data and analytics. That for any of you who are bold enough to start your own lunar or space resources focused company, there's a whole value chain where you can invest your time and energy to build solutions. And it's taking shape and form as time goes on, depending on how much more information we get and what's going to be in demand. For example, if in 5 years we come to understand that there's a massive market for oxygen traded between the moon and Earth, then there's a more of a call from an engineering perspective to work out the means to extract oxygen from regolith. So from an engineering point of view, that's an opportunity with itself. I'm not saying it's the best thing to do at the moment, but it's just an example. As we started, as a registry, we started registering. So we collected data. We split the data into different categories. For example, a craft that was landed on the moon, we call it an actual presence. If it crashed, we gave it an impact zone. The Apollo crewed sites are heritage areas because the US made a law that they have heritage areas. And then we have a fourth category, planned presence. In this case, this might be outdated, but it's for the iSpace mission. In this case, what we've done is we've looked at the very latitude, longitude points on the moon, and we drew a boundary around it to try and start building in a registry that objects that are already on the lunar surface, they require a boundary because under Outer Space Treaty, you are afforded the right to non-interference. But also, particularly with, let's say, an Apollo heritage zone, you can't have some enterprising space tourist plan to land 200 meters away from a landing craft, because once they land, their thrusters will kick up regolith. Due to the lot lower gravity, that regolith flies through the air and can potentially cut up anything that's there. So from a registry perspective, we put in boundaries, which can also be changed by radius. But it's just an example of, when you look at new markets, a new territory, you've got to start making rules and laying order to the chaos. From our 4 categories, we expanded it to more categories to take into account science, development zones, and from a commercial point of view, resource registrations, infrastructure registrations, and energy registrations. Now I'm just going to swip over to our map. Can you see a map?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, cool. So this is our registry in its current form. This is what we call the 3D map, public map. And I'll just turn off some of the noise. And I'm going to start with the, this is the blue icons are actual presence, which are missions that have actually been to the moon and in some ways still there. So this is a working example of how our registry works, where we do actually have mapping. We've located areas. You'll notice that our map doesn't have the high resolution of something more fancy like Google Earth. It's because we had to design it so that it was worked in any browser. Now, as a registry, we started making images and registrations for particular landers. In this case, Surveyor 6. As a registry, we made a website to back up our registry. They should flip to it now. Can you see a website?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, cool. So we make an actual registration document. Because we are a registry, we have to stick to the very kind of boring side of the business, which is it's a registry. and be very particular about latitude, longitude, where it is, establish a boundary, and make a map. Because our goal is to help in the planning of missions, both commercial and public. So I'll go back to the map. So this is the side of the registry where we take existing data. Example, I think there's it's less than 100 missions that have already been to the moon, including the impact zones, which there are quite a few of, where, for example, an upper stage that for an Apollo mission has been directed to the moon as part of an experiment. So we would catalog that, we'd put it in our system. It is part of our registry. After that, we started registering planned missions to the moon. And once we started doing that, by the way, our data is not completely accurate because it's like shooting a moving target, trying to keep up with everyone's planned missions. And then trying to work out how sincere they are about their missions, because some of them just fall through, as we found out. But here's a good example. Here's the one we made for Intuitive Machines, going to the Valley of the Storms. Again, we make a registration for it. We try and work out where they're going, and I don't think they have a very definitive point, so we put a general point on the map because we do like to know where they're going. But at this stage of the game, it's too early to say exactly where anyone's going. But once you start putting in the generics of their locations, then you can start to see, okay, well, where are they going? What are they interested in? What areas are they interested in? Why are they there? A good example is we're going to go to the far side of the moon, and we'll try and find one of the Chinese missions. Oops, I think I've gone too far. This will always happen when you're doing a live event. And that's an actual mission. So down here, we have a Chang'e 4 rover. We actually have two. We have the Chang'e 4 rover and the lander. The rover is still traveling, as far as I know. So they're on our map. We've registered them. We look at where they're going to. We have other maps where we've downloaded the resources detected or inferred, and you can quickly work out what different locations of the moon have more value versus others. For us, a very interesting area is the South Pole. And admittedly, because there's quite a few planned missions, and we just had to catalog them as going into a certain area, hence this kind of uniform portrayal of where they're going. But you can kind of see that there's quite a few missions heading that way. Some of them are probably outdated, but it kind of displays to us where the interest is and what the target locations are. I'll just try and bring an example up. So again, Shackleton Crater is a favorite location. Shackleton Crater is a bit of a tricky location from a registration point of view to make great maps out of, because it's on the South Pole. It's not as though we have excellent coverage of all lunar areas anyway. But for us, our maps are a work in progress, and as long as we can register activity, we can put it on our map and try and understand where is everyone going. Where's everyone going helps us identify very high value areas, which means what makes a high value area. Shackleton Crater, it's all about extracting water at the moment, which is the main reason for going there. Now I'll just flip back to our presentation. Yes, Registry, we have sorted out what different areas, different categorizations. How we build a business is part of what we do is we try to understand what resources are there, and thankfully there's an abundance of material thanks to the US, and we've started working with some European, Smart One imagery as well. What's on the moon is super exciting because it's our closest planet. Where else are you going to go? And we need to work out why to go there. It's very easy to get lost in the the moon Mars debate. Let's go to Mars. I'm like, yeah, fine, but it's the moon's there. It's only 3 days away. So what is there? And there are minerals there. There are resources there. It's just a question of finding out where they are and the engineering means to extract them. So this is a big part of our business. Yes, we are a registry, but also we really enjoy looking into locations of interest, because those locations of interest will be the mines of tomorrow. But I just don't know if it's going to be it looks like the mines that we think about at the moment. It might be just operations processing regolith to extract a small amount of metals out of it. But anyway, that's how it will pan out. So we worked out different categories. We worked out a commercial angle for registrations. On the left-hand side, this is pretty much covered. We have missions, there's heritage zones, there's going to be more heritage zones, there's a lot of impact zones, there's a lot of planned missions. We have science locations. We've worked with some with our partner on where are the best location for a radio telescope on the far side of the moon. We started working on development zones, which is basically you find a zone, and I'll flip back to the map because it makes more sense. Yeah, we've started building development zones because in order to get the industry excited, you have to reach out to them and try and highlight areas of interest. So for us, I'm just going to, where is this development? Okay, here's a development zone that we worked out with our partner company. It's called New Pilbara North. It's an iron region. It's in one of the seas, and I'm going to flick to another map which has a bit more information about it. Now, can you see a 2D map? So can you see a flat map?
Yeah, we do.
Great. So this is the development zone called New Pilbara North. The name I came up with, Pilbara is a region in Australia which is very rich in iron. Next time you open your refrigerator or drive your car, it might be using iron from the Pilbara region. So anyway, for us, we looked at the region. We looked at our different maps that show the predominance of iron, and we worked out that something had struck here and kicked out a lot of iron-rich material and sprayed it around this crater. And the sea is already iron-rich anyway. So for us, we worked out, okay, if you're going to have make it a development zone, then you start to manage it. We designated these as the more high resources, potential resources zones. So we designated these as resources areas, so 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. We designate this as a refuse pit, and we designate this as a potential port. This is just an example of how one looks at the lunar terrain in terms of inferred resources. I'm not saying resources are definitely there, because you need to do a bit of ground truthing. But then how you start planning on managing a proper resource extraction operation. And it is possible. It's just a case of, like anything, planning and working with your partners to understand what's there and what is possible. In this case, we said, okay, let's focus on you can see the lighter areas around this crater here. That's where the ejector from the impact is. It's kicked up a lot of iron, more material with more iron than usual. So there we thought, okay, well, these would be your first areas for an in situ resource utilization operation if you wanted to focus on iron. Now we have maps where we can see that there's areas where there's titanium or, for example, maybe thorium, and you can quickly go through it and work out where there's different kinds of materials in greater ratios in other areas. I don't want to say that, you know, some areas are a bonanza or the golden lode, because to be honest, we're not there yet. You know, before proper mining extraction operations are underway, there needs to be a lot more testing on actual locations. So I'll flip back to our presentation. So hang on. Yes. So we have built a registry platform. We built maps. We work with a company, Lunar Station. They do the terrain analysis. We've been in the kind of space entrepreneurial business for like 10 years now. And the Lunar Resources Registry is, I'll go back to more map because it's quite more exciting than the faces of my business partner and I. The Lunar Resources Registry, it's a business to solve a problem. And in a space commerce kind of industry of, you know, new companies, established companies, or, you know, exciting rocket companies and things like that, we look at the Lunar Resources Registry as a bit of a boring business, but vital, because it solves a problem, but it also creates a market, because you can't have a functioning market, or, you know, you can't plan these very expensive missions to another planet without some kind of planning and due diligence and structure behind understanding what's there and why a particular company should go there. So questions?
Wow. Okay, thanks, Simon. Thanks, Simon Drake. That's amazing. So we've got quite a lot of questions already. So what I propose is we can open the microphone to Carlos and yourself, okay, as a panel, and I'll pose the questions, and each of you can give your best answer, which I'm sure will give us a great viewpoint on the questions. Really, really exciting presentation. So let's start with the easy questions first, just to get you warmed up. So the first question, easy one. So from Dominique, what is the update frequency of the data in the registry?
At the moment, okay, there's two different data sets. There's planned missions. So how we amassed that data was we looked around on news sources and companies that were going to the moon and worked out, I think we did it like 6 months ago. And we have to do it again soon. We have to update our planned list of who's going to the moon, because some companies say that they're going there, but it's kind of, you know, hot air. And other companies, you know, they might have a delay. The other side is in what you call our back office, or our non-public maps, are the resource layers, which can only get updated once there's new data available. At the moment, there's not much new data available. So in terms of refreshing the data, not much going on at the moment. We've loaded our registry full of it. The most things that get updated on a monthly basis or a half-yearly basis are planned missions.
Okay, thanks, great. And a couple of questions from Vincent. He's asking, about ESA Moonlight. So I can reply to that. So ESA Moonlight is an initiative by the European Space Agency to push and kickstart the commercial space businesses. So they have a call for ideas at the moment dealing with communications and whatever we're going to call GPS. I don't know how we're going to call GPS for the moon. I think we'll have to have a new name. Maybe, Carlos, you could have a go at answering the question about the GPS and the communications.
Yeah, so Moonlight focuses on communication navigation. They've designed a system they called LCNS, Lunar Communication Navigation System. Horrible acronym. And essentially what ESA wants to do is completely subsidize the construction of a communications and navigation system on the moon. Subsidize both the construction, the design, construction, and operations, and have it as a barter tool with NASA so that they can put European payloads, astronauts, and NASA missions. It's a interesting situation because NASA is wanting to do communications commercially. So we'll see what will happen there.
Okay, great, super. Simon Drake, technical question from Ricardo about water and propellants. So I think he's asking about the possibility of realistically making rocket fuel from regolith.
Yeah, this is the big magic question, because there's a lot of energy, pardon the pun, riding on, we're building up towards the anticipation that you can extract water from the moon. To me, it's a question of energy that you bring along to blast the regolith. So I think that's the missing point here, is that yes, it's technically possible. I mean, you heat anything up, you're going to get something out of it. But I think that there's a lot more work to be done on providing the energy to make such operations functional, or realistic, so that we're not getting like 5 milliliters of water. You need tons. One of the other businesses I work on is the Space Commodities Exchange, which is a US company, and we really look at what is the reality of water and oxygen extracted from the lunar surface, and how it can be traded in real quantities to make a difference. Yeah, so more work to be done on that one.
Okay, and helium-3, question from JMG about helium-3, the interest of that.
Yeah, helium-3, we actually had our geologist, Carolina, looking on at our maps to try and work out some helium-3 areas. We did make a couple of development zones, but the hardest thing is you've got to process a lot of regolith to get a small amount of helium-3. So from a mapping point of view, yes, you can look at a map and say, well, helium-3 should be in this particular area based on, this academic or scientific method. But from an extraction point of view, I don't see any technology there that can possibly do it in such a massive form. But, for the younger members out there, build it.
All right. Carlos, we've got a question from Vincent asking about the expected outcomes of the CLPS missions for NASA. Will the impact of that be public to a certain extent, so that EU companies can learn from what NASA's doing on the CLPS?
I mean, whatever the results will of course be public. At least from NASA payloads, these are usually published very quickly, and NASA pictures and so on, they are always in the public domain. Of course, these missions always carry private payloads, which will most likely keep the results to themselves. But in any case, what we have to learn here is how to properly incentivize the development of lunar activity, which is what NASA is successfully doing, and what we're not seeing any agency in Europe do.
Mr. Drake, do you have a comeback on that question? The same question about the CLPS missions from NASA.
Yeah, they're it's good to see activity, and it's good to, I know some of the companies that are involved in it. It gives them, a real kick in the right way. In particular, it gives them a reason to showcase their technology, and a reason and money, which helps. But to me, it's not actually a paying customer. It's still NASA as a customer. And there are offshoots where, they find another paying customer for some of the payload. It's an important step towards where we want to go. Where I want to go is I want to have a big mining company say, all right, we want to try it. We want to, try and we want to know, can we get 1,000 tons of titanium, something like that. But the CLIPS program is leading the way, and it's important steps. So I can't complain. It would be good if Europe could emulate something like that. But with a European twist.
Okay, great. Question also from Vincent. We're touching on the legal aspect. This is a very thorny topic. Who has the right to do what? We know the 1957 Outer Space Treaty exists. We have Luxembourg, who's pushing heavily. US, of course. So, each of you could give really your opinion on basically what this Vincent is asking is first come, first served. So does that exist as a concept, first come, first served, in the far west idea of 19th century California, or do we have to be regulated and sustainable?
Yeah, Carlos, do you want to go first?
I can go first. I mean, the reality on the moon today is that it is first come, first serve. There's absolutely no legal framework around who gets to extract what. There is legal precedence that whatever you get from the moon, you can keep. That's what we've seen with NASA's samples and Soviet samples that came back from the moon. And there is no coordination on who goes where. There is, as Simon mentioned in his presentation, the right to prevent people from interfering with you, but we don't know whether that means an exclusion zone in activities, whether that means that they can just go sit by you and record everything you're doing, or there's no precedence there because we haven't had two separate entities operating in the same space on the moon yet. So at the moment, yes, that's the situation. Whether it has to stay that way, well, I guess the answer is obviously no. Nothing on Earth works that way. And eventually we'll have to come up with a solution. If anyone has the expectation that the legal framework will come before the activities, I think we can completely forget about that. That's also not how anything has worked on Earth before. The laws come after there is a need for them. And there will not be a need until we have two separate entities working on the moon simultaneously and potentially entering into conflict with one another. So that's how I see things going. And we'll see how things develop from today.
I took a proactive approach. So we came up with the concept of a registry. We looked at this problem. We looked at the laws, and we read through the laws, and we worked out that they were outdated. But what are you going to do? You can't do much about it. So far, as a registry, worked out how could one theoretically say, I want to go to a location, but before you go there, you have to approach governments for permission to launch, investors to build the business, capital to go that particular location. So for us, we did work out I could call it a narrow path under existing law to say, let's say a mining company wants to go to a particular location. The best way to do it is, from our point of view as a registry, we want to generate business. So we had to solve this problem, is to say how well intentioned is your business model. For example, as a registry, we can't have some, a Bitcoin millionaire teenager say, yeah, I want to go to the moon, here's some money. I'm taking that. That can't work with us. What can work with us is if a company that has the ability to act on their operations, then for us as a registry, we would say, okay, well, here's a valid case of someone who wants to undertake exploration and extraction. But that hopefully will happen sooner rather than later. But the best and surest way to be anywhere is actually to go there. And the most hard thing about the moon is that you have to be there in order to claim a location. And under the law, that's the way it is. But I think things will change, because in order to move the lunar environment to a more commercial environment, there's going to be more planning involved. Planning means, being able to express one's right to go to a particular area unencumbered or without competition. For example, the best coming up example is South Pole, where there's water, there's different missions, and there's only a very small area on the rim of one of the craters that has permanent sunlight. So this particular rim, that's hot property in terms of real estate. That's, beachfront property, whatever you want to call it. So at some stage, the players are going to have to come together and say, all right, we're going to have to, work out who goes where on this area that has, permanent sunshine, because that's where you can erect your solar panels and have, energy all year round to conduct a water extraction operation. So the problem is already about to happen. It'll be interesting to see how it gets solved, and how a company like ours can be part of it.
Yeah, I think especially interesting on that front is what will happen with China and other players, potentially Russia. I mean, it is very likely that among Western companies, entities, we create a registry, like what Simon is working on. But then again, we have two questions. The first one is, how do we police all of this? And the second one is, what will people actually abide by this? And we see already how hard it is on Earth to enforce things like exclusive economic zones in the continental shelves. We see countries continuously invade each other's economic zones if they have conflicting claims. And there is very little that anyone can do around that, short of putting an aircraft carrier close to your fishing boats. How do we manage that on the moon? I mean, what if China just comes in and puts their solar panels just next to yours and start blocking your sun? How are you going to police that? Are you going to nuke them? Are you going to send astronauts there and just remove the solar panels? There isn't even any international way of dealing with that. There is not an office in the UN where you can go and complain about that. So that will be the interesting part. I mean, within the Western world, we have all a common interest in collaborating and in making things work. And especially the companies, they have a common interest on not making too much noise, because otherwise it will be harder to get licenses. It will be harder to start operating. They might get the public opinion against them, but a foreign actor, potentially hostile actor like China, they don't have those interests. The only interest they have is their own. We'll see. I mean, I'm of the opinion that we'll see some military activity on the moon earlier than most people think, simply because of these issues. I mean, if you want to have solar panels next to each other without interfering, and you have to enforce it, you probably need some kind of military presence there, either directly people or just observation satellites monitoring everything, ensuring that people are not interfering with each other, things like that. It will be an interesting situation.
Yeah, I like what you said about the United Nations. There is an office for outer space affairs at the UN, but there's no specific office, Simon, is that right, that deals with the moon? There's nothing particular that's trying to set up, organize the way the lunar economy will go through.
As far as I know, no. I mean, I think what they do is they rely on the existing machinations of policy over the decades. But what's happened recently is there is a rush. We all want to get there. We're having slight issues of what we're talking about. So yeah, look, I think in some case, the best thing is when you do have two competitors over a particular area, because then it brings a problem to a head. In some ways, that's a good problem to have. It creates media attention. Hopefully, expensive technology doesn't get blown up or whatever. But it kind of raises awareness, which creates, solutions out of it. That's my kind of theory of how it might work out.
Okay, great. So that's given us a lot to think about. So while we're ruminating on that, we can maybe ask Carlos to kick off his presentation. We're running early, which is good. So you got a bit more time there. So please take the floor.
All right. Let me share my screen then. There it is. All right. So, well, thank you, Simon Drake, for your great presentation, and thank you, Simon Chambers, for inviting me today here. So very briefly, first about me and about my company. So I'm Carlos Entrena, I'm the CEO of Plus Ultra Space Outposts. We're based in Madrid, and we are working on a lunar constellation for communications and navigation. We are part of the accelerator that Simon is running, the Space Hub Network. And today I want to talk to you not so much about precisely what we're doing, but about our current vision of the status of the race back to the moon and why I actually think that we're going to make it this time. So this is not just another failed attempt like we've had in the past. This is there's a general consensus already in the industry that this is the real deal, and that we will see continuous lunar activity from now on, starting this year with the first Eclipse missions. So the first thing I wanted to look at is why we're witnessing the best opportunity in history for the sustainable development of the lunar economy. There's multiple reasons. The first one is the record commitment we're seeing from the countries, from the governments. There's 5 different lunar programs going on. Some of them are related, of course: Gateway, Artemis, Eclipse, Moonlight Initiative. They all want to work with each other, but they are funded and developed separately, independently. They're all ongoing. Eclipse is the one that is the most advanced. It will start flying this year. Gateway, Moonlight will start flying around 24, sometimes same time as our Artemis will be landing on the lunar surface. And then there is the Chinese International Lunar Research Station, of which we don't really know much about, except that they have announced it, and apparently they have a collaboration with Russia for that. And then there's 18 different signatories of the Artemis Accords. This was a year and a half ago. This was only 6 countries that had signed the Artemis Accords. And as things develop, we'll probably see more countries joining. And this is a great thing to see, because that's what happened with ISS. Eventually, there were so many countries committed that no one single country wanted to pull out. And for the moment, it's only the US pushing Artemis, but it's a matter of time that we start seeing other countries joining. And it's a matter of time because we also see a record number of missions on the moon. Yesterday, North Sky Research released their latest report. They are reporting 250 lunar missions planned for this decade, which is an insane amount. I have not looked at the details of the report, but I can tell you that similar reports a year and a half ago were saying 70 missions. So we are essentially doubling every 12 months, which is an insane rate of growth in terms of planned missions. And a vast majority of these are by commercial entities. So Artemis, Eclipse, Gateway, even Moonlight, yes, they're backed by the agencies, but among them, they maybe have 50 missions altogether. So we're talking about 200 missions planned by individual companies. and by private entities here. We're also seeing record investment in the space industry in general and in infrastructure in particular. And in the end, what we're talking about the moon at the moment is mostly infrastructure. We're talking transportation, we're talking communications. These are the numbers from the Space Angels report. 46 billion invested last year. We all know it was also a great year for exits for investors. So this number will likely keep growing significantly as these returns are reinvested. And finally, what we're seeing is record number of companies. There's 110 is the number that we have in our database at the company, entities working on lunar activities. I'm pretty sure this number is much bigger now, has to be around 150 to 200 entities working on lunar activities. There's a significant number of them working in transportation and a significant number of them working in surface infrastructure. So surface infrastructure, that means power production, that means communications on the surface, rovers on the surface, even things like road building. We're seeing a lot of new companies popping up every day. So this is a situation that has never been seen in history before. So the norm until this epoch that we're seeing until 2022, there was maybe one lunar program going on simultaneously, maybe two if you had the lunar race situation from Apollo. Usually these were just run by the individual countries. There were never international collaboration programs for these things. I mean, yes, Apollo had some international collaboration with the Deep Space Network, but it was just for the locations of the Deep Space Network. Everything else was run by individual countries. There were, of course, no private lunar missions plans. Maybe some crazy person was saying they wanted to go there, but nowhere close to 150. And of course, the number of investment is in record, the number of companies going on. So we are in a pretty unique situation. But we still have to make this a reality. We've had a ton of disappointments in the past. The Apollo Extension Series, the Space Exploration Initiative, the Constellation Program, all canceled. Even Artemis has been, SLS, the key aspect of Artemis, has been delayed something around 16 times. It's already 6 years delayed. Artemis already being delayed from the initial 2024 first landing. Now it's 2025. And we still see a lot of uncertainty going forward. So we need to see a successful lunar return program. We need to see those Artemis landers happening. We need to see the first commercial lunar mission, the first commercial lunar lander actually going to the moon and landing. And we need to see a successful lunar business, which so far we have not seen at all. We only have promises, but the promising part here is the amount of promises that we're having, because before it was only just one thing, and now we've got at least 250 things going on simultaneously. So what are the key steps that we need in order to create this sustainable lunar economy? So from these promises that we have today, what are the three key steps that we have to do during this decade in order to be sustainable? So the first one is, of course, reducing the risk. Today, we see, as I said, a lot of uncertainty in the market, a lot of uncertainty in the technologies. There's only promises, and we have to reduce that risk. We have to make sure that whoever is operating on the moon can do that safely, not only from a technical point of view. Of course, we don't want any astronauts dying, but we want to make investments as safe as possible. We want to make operations as safe as possible. We want to have some certainty on schedule, on returns, on revenues, things like that. We also have to increase the value of lunar activities. Today, it's very limited. I mean, the main value you can get from the moon is just going to the moon. So transportation companies and whoever serves those transportation companies are the ones that can get some business going on. But beyond that, it's extremely difficult. You still cannot sell anything on the moon. You cannot, there's no value in extracting propellant beyond the technological development or the scientific value. Even things like prospecting for the moment are just scientific endeavors. So we need to start creating more value on the moon. And finally, we will have to increase the long-term returns of all the lunar missions. It cannot be that they are dependent on government contracts. It cannot be that we're just looking at 1 decade. If we want to have a sustainable presence on the moon, a sustainable economy, we need to start seeing companies operate over long periods and have long-term returns, even if those government programs start dying off. So these three things essentially translate into the three things that the industry is actually working on today. So reducing risk essentially means working on interoperability and coordination, and I'll tell you a bit more about that soon. If we want to increase value of lunar businesses, we need to start creating value on the moon. We need to start creating value in space for space. And we also need to establish a permanent presence on the moon. That's the way to have these long-term returns. And I'll dive right into that, giving you more details. So with these three aspects, we do have reasons for hope. It's not just the amount of activity that's being planned around the moon, but it's the type of activity that is happening around the moon. So first, about interoperability and coordination, we're seeing a concerted effort within the industry working on that aspect. So first, let me tell you why we need this. The first one is reducing risk reduction. So we provide redundancies for providers for key systems. If I'm a lander, I want to have multiple ways to communicate with that lander. If I have a payload that wants to go to the moon, I want to have multiple providers. I don't want to rely on one single provider that can get me there, because it might happen that they don't fly. It might happen that they go bankrupt. It might happen that they don't get those contracts from NASA that they were relying upon. Same for everything else. I mean, if I need a rover to go anywhere on the moon, I want to have multiple potential providers, because no one yet has a rover that flies. If at least the moment someone succeeds and the moment someone proves that their technology works the way it does, the risk is reduced immediately. But for the moment, what I need to do is options. When I have options, I need to have alternatives for all my providers, and that requires interoperability. Also, being interoperable means that we can create new lunar businesses. It reduces the barriers of entry to the lunar environment. It means that I can have open standards. It means that I can have systems that have been flown before, for example, for communications, for navigation. I mean, we've seen that with the explosion of small satellites in the past 2 decades, beginning with CubeSats. The moment there was a standard that was interoperable with multiple providers, we started seeing an increase in launch capabilities. And same thing for rideshare opportunities and things like that. Interoperability reduces the barriers of entry, makes it cheaper to access the market, and it will create new lunar businesses. And finally, coordination means that people can actually work with each other on the moon. So if you're providing a service on the moon, you need your customers to be there at the same time you are. You cannot just launch a mission that lasts 15 days and hope that someone is there. You have to coordinate with them. This goes beyond just non-interference. This means that the timelines have to align. This means that the investments, milestones for the various companies have to align. And essentially, we all have to be there all up at the same time. Otherwise, we don't have a lunar economy. We just have one-off missions. So what are we seeing on this front? We're seeing an industry that is focusing now on infrastructure systems. We talked about Moonlight before. NASA is working on the LunarNet standards. CLIPS is an infrastructure service, believe it or not. I mean, in the end, it's a delivery, something like the post system. We're also seeing continued coordination efforts. Simon just talked about the Lunar Registry. We also see this consortium, Euro to Moon. We're seeing the agencies work with each other more. We're also seeing a change towards how missions are designed. They're more focused on the customer. We're seeing companies worry about their commercial value propositions and not so much about only the engineering challenges of their systems, which was the trend in lunar ideas just 2 decades ago. And we're seeing at the moment as well creative destruction. What I mean with this is that we're seeing a lot of people doing a lot of different things to solve the same problem. Multiple architectures from the same solution. We don't have a central committee choosing one architecture that then eventually becomes too expensive or too risky, or for whatever reason is canceled. We're seeing a bunch of private actors working towards the same goal with different approaches. And that's the way everything has been solved on Earth so far. We don't have a centralized economy that just decides how to do things. We have multiple people trying off different solutions, and eventually the market itself converges to the most ideal or most efficient solution. So it's the same case with the next aspect. So creating value in a space for a space. What I mean with this is that we need to realize that the moon cannot compete with Earth equivalents. That will not happen in the near future. I'm not going to say during this century, because there's still 80 years in this century, but I can definitely tell you within the next 2 decades, the moon will always be more expensive than Earth in the vast majority of cases. Except for specific purposes like science, military, where the cost does not really matter. The moon will not be able to compete with Earth. So we have to find applications that are used, that are exclusively for the moon. So we need a value chain that creates value in space and ends in space. We need people doing activities on the moon to serve other lunar businesses or to serve other activities in space. And otherwise, we'll just have an extension of the Earth economy, similar like we have in Antarctica. And Antarctica is just a scientific military base. Well, there's a bunch of them by each country, and no one would consider the Antarctic economy. No one talks about that. It's just a specific project from various militaries. So what are we seeing on this front? This goes beyond just the moon. This goes also to developing the various aspects of the value chain that the moon can serve. So we're seeing huge development in orbital servicing, orbital manufacturing, orbital things like orbital refueling. We're seeing a growth in space relays, commercial communication, navigation. Not only on the moon, we're seeing that in every single Earth orbit. We're seeing as well last mile and lunar transportation, rideshare vehicles, people that would be the customers of refueling, which could be the customer of the lunar resources, which are the customer of the lunar transportation. And we start seeing those links in the value chain start establishing each other, or at least players in each aspect, in each chain of the value chain start appearing. We're also seeing a growing number of space-based end users, not only rovers, landers. I mean, just 2 days ago, a company announced they want to build data centers on the moon, and they have funding for that apparently. So even use cases like that had not been put on the table in the past now are being considered as a normal thing, as a standard business as usual. And this is also what we need. We need those end users on the moon, and we're seeing them appear. And finally, we need companies that use space as a recipe. And what I mean here is that space is the main value generator. We don't see that with Earth observation. Earth observation, the main value generator is the data analytics. And we actually use a fusion of sensors on Earth, on the ground, but also in space, or maybe drone pictures, pictures from planes, things like that, to get the most out of data, out of those data. But for the moon, we need companies whose main value creation is in space, and we're seeing that. I mean, when you have transportation that brings you to the moon, the main value that they're creating is not just having a rocket; it's bringing you to the moon. Same thing with things like orbital communications on the moon. I mean, the main value they're creating there is using the orbital environment around the moon to enable more operations there. So we're starting to see those companies appear. And these are the 3 aspects that we need for a value chain to be established on the moon. We need the end users, we need the companies that serve those end users, and we need the applications that can actually work in space. And finally, what we need is work towards a permanent presence on the moon. And this is a key aspect of it for 2 reasons. The first one, and that is something that everyone in the lunar economy or in the lunar business needs to accept from the beginning, is that the government projects for exploration cannot be justified indefinitely. There's only so much value that you can bring to the public. There's only so much time that you can get the public hyped up for a 10 billion a year, $2 million a year project. and there's always the political risk that the next administration comes and just changes it because they want to do something different. They want to completely cut ties with the previous administration. So these programs that we're seeing, Artemis, Moonlight, CLIPS, they have a huge political risk, and eventually they will dry up. And we need a justification to go to the moon, and we need a justification for all that lunar activity. And that requires humans living on the moon. That's what it is. I mean, if you look at the Earth economy, every single aspect of it eventually goes towards a human doing something. And specifically, it goes towards three things. One is the military, the other is scientific research, and the other is just living. Because those are the three things that we do and we consume things for and we provide services for without asking a why. And on the moon, it has to be the same thing. It cannot be just going to the moon to explore. That's, I mean, okay, you go there, take some pictures and come back home, which is what Apollo did. It also cannot be just for resources. The resources have to go somewhere. You need a use for them. And eventually, if we want to have really sustainable presence on the moon, we need to have the people living there and demanding those services, demanding those resources, be it on the moon, be it on Mars, anyway you need in space. If you want a space economy that goes beyond just servicing Earth, you need people living in space. And the industry, what it's doing is remarkable on this point. So we're seeing every single space company has been working hard to create a continuous demand for their missions. We are seeing a better mission cadence. We're starting to see commercial missions happening in all fronts. I mean, not only the moon, but ISS is seeing the first commercial missions. Even Dragon is seeing their first fully commercial, fully private missions going nowhere. We're seeing the Eclipse missions. The Eclipse providers, they're being very, very creative when it comes to getting commercial customers to go there. And I go back to that company working on data centers on the moon. That's a very imaginative proposition. We're also seeing a focus on demand-driven missions. So we're starting to see the industry already not just going to the moon for the sake of it. Every mission that is announced has already a customer in place. Otherwise, people don't go. And that is already a shift, because 10 years ago, the arguments in the space community was moon or Mars, and no one was asking why moon or why Mars. It was just, okay, we have to go somewhere. But now missions are only announced after someone is willing to go there for whatever reason. And finally, we're seeing already this human demand starting to develop. There's multiple human landing systems being developed. There's, of course, Starship, Blue Origin has theirs, Dynetics has theirs. NASA is now starting the contracting process for the second landing system. And we're seeing also the support aspects of the human presence being developed. We've got Toyota working on rovers with JAXA. We've got a bunch of people working on habitats, mostly in Europe, interestingly enough. And we've got the aspects like power, like manufacturing being developed. So all of this needed to have that permanent presence there. So again, I tie back to what I was saying before, that we're seeing the whole value chain being developed. Well, the final aspect of it, the human demand, is also being developed on the moon. And that gives me reason to hope, but things can still go wrong. Of course, missions will be canceled. Companies will go bankrupt, things will not happen, or things will be delayed completely forever. We could also see missions fail, of course. I mean, of the missions that are planned for 2022, there's 11 of them. If 50% of those succeed, I would consider that an extremely good achievement already. So yeah, things can go wrong, but even if we have 20-30% launch rate of everything that is being planned, that's way more activity than ever. Even 10%. I mean, if we go to just 25 missions over a decade, that of course is not enough for a market. So most commercial activities will not be there, but 25%, I mean, 25 missions over a decade is still more than we've seen since the Apollo era. Programs can, of course, be delayed, but we're seeing this increasing reliance on commercial involvement. We're seeing a lot of international collaboration as well happening. So this again reduces the risk of program cancellation. And even if missions fail, we still see that success rates will get better over time. I mean, what happens with launchers, with development of Falcon 9, was first Falcon 1, then Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, the whole reusable rocket aspect of it. And of course, every single small launcher provider, there's not a single one of them that has not had a launch failure. But they are getting better over time. So that's not something that should just put us off. What we have to realize is that the lunar economy requires a minimum level of redundancy. So we need a minimum level of missions to be planned, so that even if just a certain percentage of them succeed, we see a lot of activity happening. We need redundancy in providers and capabilities. So as I was saying before, so that we can have multiple alternatives for the missions. We need redundancy in plans and customers so that business plans can actually close. And then of course, there will be failures, there will be cancellations, but that's just how everything works on Earth, really. I mean, every single industry sees a lot of startups start up and close. And every single industry has a lot of failed developments. That's how technology development works. The only difference is that in space it's very shiny and has a lot of fireworks. And it looks like we probably have already reached that point with the minimum level of redundancy. We have 250 missions planned, and the consensus already among the people in the industry is that the lunar industry is going to happen this decade. People are questioning how much of it will happen or when, but not the fact that it will. And that is already a huge change versus 2 years ago. I mean, 2 years ago when I started the company, every time I talked to an investor, they thought I was crazy. Now they only think that I'm optimistic. So that's a huge change in attitude. So what can we expect for these next 10 years? Well, this. This is the list of all the missions that have been announced. It's probably outdated already because there's new missions being announced continuously. These are all the programs that are happening, plus the commercial missions that have been announced. So we've got Artemis, of course. We've got everything related to Gateway, including the Gateway Logistics Services, which people always forget about, but they were assigned to SpaceX some years ago. CLIPS, of course, 2 missions per year. That's the minimum that NASA wants to do. They have budget for around 30 missions total, so that will probably be more. And of course, the commercial folks, they have announced missions until 2024, first Blue Moon. Why? Because what I said before, they're only announcing missions once they have a customer. But all of these companies, they want to do a mission per year at the very least. So this level of activity that we're seeing now, this amount of missions that are being announced, this will inevitably grow as the decade advances. I mean, we're in contact with all the lander providers. They're now starting to plan their missions for 24, 25. So during 2022, we'll start seeing these rows in 24 and 25 start filling up with privately run missions. Some of them will be CLIPS, some of them will be completely private. But we're seeing that. And of course, as soon as Blue Moon and Starship start happening and start operations, then we'll see another uptick in activity. And this is an important thing. These are just the publicly advertised missions. Every single company has a mission that has a goal for a mission per year. And then you've got all the other people down the chain, the people working on manufacturing, the people working on research prospecting, on rovers that are also planning missions, but that they have not announced them yet, either because they're not funded or because they're not ready or because they have not selected a lander yet, but they are going to the moon. So this is how the map looks like today. 1 year from now, I'm pretty sure I will not be able to fit it within just one slide for the whole decade. And it will have a year less than here. So just to close this, it seems like we are doing all the right things to get the lunar economy off the ground. We're working on interoperability. We're seeing more commercial activity. We're seeing more customer focus. We're seeing an infrastructure mindset. we're ticking all the different boxes to get an economy on the moon going on during this decade. A lot can happen in 10 years, so we'll see a large failure rate, large cancellation rate. Technology will only advance so much, so maybe the human aspect of it doesn't really arrive until the end of the decade. Maybe Starship is a complete flop and we have to go back to putting our hopes on SLS. Who knows? A lot can happen, but the important thing is that it seems lunar development is an inevitability in the coming years. We have that critical mass of lunar plans and investments, and that is only going to grow. And I can tell you that from my own experience. 2 years ago, I couldn't meet a VC that had done an investment on the moon. There were some exceptions of VCs that had invested on the Eclipse companies when they started back in the Google Lunar X Prize times. And none of them wanted to repeat because they had had a lot of trouble finding further investment for those companies. Now we're seeing a lot of investors that are working on a lunar portfolio. Some of them have already done their first investments, and we're seeing as well increasing investment from the governments. South Korea, they've increased their space budget by more than 15%. NASA's budget keeps growing every year. ESA is announcing that they expect to have an even larger budget increase in this ministerial council this year than in the last one in Sevilla. So things are definitely looking up. And at the moment, it looks like the moon will be a thing within 2 to 3 years. The only question is how much of it we will see and who will be the players. But the moon will be part of our daily lives, same as GPS is. And with that, thank you very much.
Wow, Carlos. Okay, thank you very much. Very, very good, very interesting. As always, feel free to post your questions, everyone. There's so much to think about, but let's try and get the questions going. So there was a question from Ricardo. Did you see that already about the mining? Maybe Simon, you know something about mining, being from Australia. Okay, so the question is, do you understand risks for interoperability being put in danger if you get a large multi-billion company like Rio Tinto BHP trying to take all of the pie? I mean, how's that going to work out? How's that going to pan out, Simon? If you can get your expert advice on that.
If only they would try and take the pie. That would be a lovely problem to have, because first of all, there's different areas on the lunar surface with inferred resources. So it's not like that there's just one lode of importance and it's the first person to get there wins it all. There's different areas, there's different terrain. Obviously some areas are more easy to access than others. For example, flat on the near side enables better communication. But I think back to what Carlos was talking about and tying it back into something like a mining company is who's the end customer. So and I think this problem, it needs to be addressed, because having exploration missions is fine, but we really need missions with a focus to supplying a market. So for me, a mining company, the business model would be, right, we're going to go to a certain lunar region and it's going to be similar in risk and expense to going to a high risk region on Earth. Take your pick, like an area that might be in the middle of the Civil War, in a difficult part of the world to get to, etc. So there's naturally costs involved. But the reason to go there is the extraction of a material that has such a high value, whether on Earth or on the moon. And I have a strong feeling that the mindset required for us to value the moon in a different way It's going to happen, but you just need to go through a certain process and trends beforehand. For example, I look at the amount of capital flows that have recently gone into certain assets that are questionable although if they exist or not, because they're bytes, ones and zeros. So I think some of you know what I'm talking about. So the massive momentum to go into those and invest in those with no real idea of return. If you took that momentum and put it into a moon economy, then you'd have proper operations and something to get out of it. It'd be great if you could get a titanium coin or something, or even better if the outcome of a lunar mining operation, which would act as a signal for a big company to go there, was that they had the contract to build a structure for habitation made of steel and glass derived from the moon, not just 3D printing regolith into like some kind of mud hut shape. It's things like that where the mindset needs to change a bit about what we can actually do there with enough machinery and capital. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if that happens and we have, the big mining companies trying to, try and gobble the pie up, great, because there's more pies,
Great, Carlos.
Yeah. So, I agree with what Simon said. Also a point about interoperability is that our whole world is built upon that. Your plugs work the same. The trucks, the tires are the same for the trucks. The boxes that Amazon uses are the same. Imagine if you wanted to build a logistics chain and each different truck had a door shaped completely differently, and you needed to use specific equipment to load that specific truck. You would not be getting Amazon Prime service. I can tell you that. So people are somewhat afraid of interoperability, but I don't understand the reason. Of course, every company wants their patents, but there are some basic aspects of human economy that are based on interoperability, and things being interoperable. Look at the containers, the shipping containers. So on the moon, what we have today is precisely that situation. Every single rover, every single truck has a completely different shaped door, a completely different set of wheels, and a completely different set of requirements for communications, storage, and plug-in, and same with the landers. That is not a sustainable situation long term. Of course, now we're just kind of testing, trying how things work. But when these companies come in, they will want just a lander that works, ideally multiple of them, so that they can have competition within their providers. They will want multiple rovers, and they will want these rovers to be exactly the same as each other or as similar as possible, so that they can actually use them for the same purpose. And they will want fuel storage, and they have to have the same valves, because otherwise you're having a completely different set of equipment for each provider. So interoperability only makes things easier for all these companies to come in. It's not possible for a single company to establish the whole aspect of activities that are needed for lunar mining in this example, right? It's also not the case on Earth. Rio Tinto does not design and build every single aspect of the equipment they use in a mine. They purchase the vast majority of it. And it will be the same thing on the moon. And they will not want them to be completely incompatible with each other.
And they buy in bulk.
Yeah.
A mining operation has a fleet of vehicles, to operate it, because one or two are going to break in on any given day, or as an example. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
What about stepping stones? So what I mean is, you talked briefly about OSAM, so on orbit servicing, yeah, and manufacturing. Is this a stepping stone where you will have commercial companies making a business case with standard interfaces for docking, standard interfaces for deorbit, and that could be a stepping stone towards this lunar economy?
Yeah, exactly. servicing is a customer of the lunar economy after all. I mean, if you start extracting materials and things like propellant from the moon, your obvious customers are, beyond other lunar companies, are the satellites on Earth orbit, and they require servicing. So having these capabilities is a requirement for an economy to exist on the moon. Otherwise, you don't have paying customers, and you need those paying customers, right? Also, the effort that is being developed here to start making sure that, you know, they are interoperable with each other, and that the same servicing vehicle can service multiple types of satellites. All those kind of efforts are making the industry realize the value of standardization, and it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Okay, great. We've a question from Carla asking about sustainability, but not in terms of economic business sustainability, but in terms of green sustainability. So are there any obligations, or is it up to companies to be responsible in the way that they address the moon, literally, Simon?
Yeah, this is a big question that we've had to deal with when we looked at, we created what we call a space resources legal framework. And we looked at things like sustainability, heritage areas. For example, you couldn't present to the public a plan to create like a large open cut mine on an area, knowing that everyone looks up at the moon at night and is thinking, oh, who's, you know, right now someone is blasting holes in Copernicus crater. So there are ways to look at sustainability from a scenic beauty point of view, and we already put it into our legal frameworks. Some areas are just going to have to be scenic beauty, don't touch it, leave it alone, a bit like a national park. Other areas are heritage areas like the Apollo landing sites. I would also argue that some of the early US and Soviet crash sites are heritage sites as well. You know, just leave them alone. You're not going to, you know, miss out by, you know, ignoring them. And then there's the aspect that certain parts of the moon have to be kept for future generations. Particularly, I think the ones with a more scenic element or a more prime real estate point of view. But these are easy to build in. And the good news at the moment is that we're so early in the game that if someone could go to the moon and dig a hole 100 meters wide, you're not going to see it. You're not going to see anything. Well, it's very hard to see visible scarring on the moon from where we are. You'd really have to look at it with a low lunar orbiter. But on the other side of sustainability is you have this respect for natural beauty and certain areas of cultural significance. But the sustainability that I think of is, you know, the moon is there. It's kind of in comparison to Earth, which has diversity. We really should be looking to the moon for some of our materials. And just kind of there is you know, an environmental movement to slow down on, you know, carving up the Earth looking for resources. And I'm like, well, go to the moon and do it, because there's no living things there. There's a lot of material there. If we don't, you know, you just leave it on its own, it'll still be there. But again, it's just a case of not interfering with certain areas that have cultural significance. And this is all manageable. Like, there's so much, it's untapped. It would take us hundreds of years to really kind of make a dent in it.
Wow. Okay.
Definitely. If I can add to that,
Yeah.
I mean, the advantage of the moon on that point of view, from that point of view, is that it's a dead rock. So there's no atmosphere to contaminate. There's no soil to deplete. There's no biosphere to threaten. There's nothing. It's just a bunch of rocks just sitting there with valuable materials. So it's extremely easy to avoid pollution, because what we consider pollution on Earth, on the moon, is just not pollution. It's it's a completely harmless activity. You're not displacing people or animals. You are not contaminating rivers. You are not introducing heavy metals into the food chain. And more importantly, I think, since we are developing everything from scratch, you probably have a good or extremely good track record of everything that is going on and everything that you're just leaving there, as we have today. So it will be extremely easy to put controls for the little pollution that might be, as Simon said, so things of cultural significance. But beyond that, it's a much easier proposition to avoid polluting on the moon. And that's also another good point, another good reason for space exploration. I mean, there's a lot of resources there that we can extract in energy intensive processes and with potentially radioactive or even toxic results, but they're not part of the biosphere. We're not contaminating. It's better to go and extract them there from an environmental point of view than to do it on Earth. So essentially, I see no reason not to move all the polluting industry to space eventually.
But there are 2 points I forgot about, which is first one is, and I've talked about this with our legal researcher, was that there might be a call to section off certain areas of high resource value for countries that are not yet spacefaring. So if a country, it might take them another 100 years before they get into the cislunar economy, and before they launch reaches them. So therefore we might have to say, okay, well, you need to have a certain sections of the moon for them for later on. Otherwise all the easy finds get taken care of. The other point was that, and I've heard about this theoretically, is that one method of extraction is where you blow a hole in the lunar surface to try and get down into the lower surface where there's potentially more metals. But in doing so, you create a spray of regolith that kind of might cloud up a bit. That was only one thing I've heard of from an environmental point of view that might have an impact.
Okay, it's interesting what you just said about countries maybe having a future claim. If you look at the south pole of the Earth, Antarctica, this is what happened, over 100 years ago. Basically, it was just divided the South Pole into quadrants, into sectors. So, each country, continent had its own reserved sector. So that could also be something on the moon that could be feasible.
Yeah, it's for us as a registry, it's easy because you just trying to work it out and mark it out and work out a ratio, and you build it into the system. So it is possible. It's just the willpower, and the momentum to do so. Sometimes we do think, well, we should just do it anyway, then it's done, and people can criticize us for it later. Yeah, I guess that's the joy of being a registry.
Just to change the subject to science, scientific endeavor. How's it going with the project to put a telescope on the far side of the moon?
It's a company called Lunar Resources, actively working on that. They have financing from the US government. They have some plans for the early demonstrations during this decade. But in any case, I think the most remarkable progress there is the growing consensus that the far side of the moon needs to remain a radio silent zone. And there's already talk about forbidding the use of certain frequency bands on the far side, things like S band or L band, if I remember correctly. And that will be an interesting challenge for communications. So we will likely see whatever communications we see from the far side will likely be with spot beams that are very well targeted and aiming to just keep everything as radio silent as possible. And what I love about the Farsight telescope as well is that it has to be built in the low latitudes. So even it has to be built between 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south, because if you still are beyond that, you don't see the Earth, but we emit so much radio radiation from Earth that the diffraction around the source, the rim of the moon around the poles still contaminates that area. So the only real radio silent zone is near the equatorial. And that is one of the main applications we see today that is not required to be in the South Pole, and that actually requires to be in equatorial regions of the far side. In my opinion, this can be one of the first activities that we see in those regions, and probably a good anchor customer if a international consortium is created, same as it was for the Square Kilometer Array, or even for other projects like the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva.
One of the first science registrations we made with one of our partner companies, Lunar Station, was a far side radio telescope. And I can show it to you if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Map. It's it, as Carlos was saying, you know, it's on the far side. And can you see a lunar map?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so this is the far side. I'm using our flat map because there's a bit more high definition. As you can see, there's not much activity here because all the landers and impacts were on the near side. So we found an area that was close to the equator. I think this is the equator line here. We found an area that was in a slight indentation. We called it the ear because it looks like an ear. To me anyway. So our partner company, they did the terrain analysis, and so we looked at and said, okay, as a registry, this could be a potential location for a science-based radio telescope. I'll just try and bring up more information on it because then we can go into the why. I think this is. I just got to tweak a URL because we changed some data around. So can you see that I'm on a browser now?
Yeah.
I'm just going to find the ear. Right, the ear concept, far-side radio telescope. Yeah, we registered as a 1 kilometer tile, but a radio telescope would probably be the whole small crater area. This is the analysis from Lunar Station. We really want to find a flat area within this lumpy ear base to put as a landing zone, which is apparently here or here. The details that they came up with was the best location within the ear was exactly there. And this is an altitude map. And then we looked at, this is the slope measurement. So again, dark areas, lower angle. Therefore, here was the best area to land something. Now, this area is not that massive. And then we made a registration out of it. So it's quite interesting that when we have concepts about what we can do on the moon, it's the companies and individuals that come together can quickly build out the location. I'm not into the technology, but I'm sure there's companies that are dying to land something, and to fulfill the mission of having a radio telescope. So it's quite interesting. The more we think about it, the more we combine our efforts, the more closer we get. Now the question is, who wants to build it, fund it, operate it, and own it?
Good questions. Somebody just brought up a subject, Uriel, and we didn't mention it, but it's really very relevant. How can you use AI in terms of for the lunar economy, the lunar exploration? How can we use AI to benefit from AI? We've done a lot of that on the Earth, EO, obviously, but how can we use it on the moon?
Yeah, I'll just answer quickly, then Carlos can take over.
Sure.
We've started using machine learning to matched areas where there's kind of resources. We did one where with titanium and iron to try and find out locations that had a high ratio of both. It was the goal was to find locations that had titanium and iron in high quantities. So but that was more machine learning. Our partner company, Lunar Station, they use a lot more, number crunching to derive results of locations, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of data coming in. It needs to be computed in order to work out the best locations for activities. And this is a real, AI is a big driver in working out where to actually land, because the computational power can help us determine areas that are flat, areas that have a good view of the Earth, they have a lot of sunlight. So the algorithms are on our side in this case.
Yeah, I mean, in a more generic way, artificial intelligence, of course, simplifies operations and reduces the need to have humans on the loop. I guess the earliest operations that we'll see, earliest applications will be similar to what we see in terrestrial mines. I mean, self-driving vehicles going through predefined paths is the earliest application that we'll see. Beyond that, the moon is close enough that we can do a lot of remote operations from Earth even. So we'll see applications there, but I don't believe those that say that we'll have only robots on the moon. There's no point in having only robots on the moon. You need people there. So that will be probably the earliest application, anything that is autonomous and reduces the need to have a human on the loop. Rovers and driving is the first thing that comes to mind, but of course, monitoring systems, analyzing data, offloading and loading cargo. If we can automate that, of course, it will happen.
Yeah, good point about robotics. For sure, there's is it 8 seconds delay for the communications with the moon, so that's possible. Mars is a very different story, 20-minute delay for the communications. So Mars exploration, we could imagine fleets of robots working together, multiple fleets and being coordinated, and AI working across multiple robotics systems. But yeah, the moon is not too far away, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, great, excellent.
Can I add something on that? Because it's, I strongly believe that operations of the moon will be remotely steered with humans on Earth and a mix of, AI, because the time delay isn't that large, but also anything to do with the physical operation, there's always a problem. You need human interaction to solve problems as quickly as possible. Anyone who's worked on a building site, as I did when I was younger, and I've operated heavy machinery. I used to be a forklift driver. You've got to have that human interaction, because when you're dealing with physical objects, things will happen. And I don't think that AI is at that stage yet where it can preempt accidents like a human can. So my take on it is the cislunar industry, in terms of mining and infrastructure building operations, it's not just the domain of artificial intelligence, write a script and the robots will do it. It's actually a whole new industry for individuals who want to be trained in how to operate things remotely. And that to me is the most exciting thing for the next generation, because we have to make sure that we build this cislunar infrastructure so that they can operate this machinery. And that's going to be their job. I'll be too old, but for the next generation, that's what we actually have to build it for, so that they can operate it. That's how I see it, as a positive note.
Great, excellent. Right, so I'm just going to switch and do my presentation quickly, which is basically showing you where we came from and who's presenting this and the presentation, and it's the Space Hubs network. So I'll just capture the screen. Right, so this is the Space Hubs network that have produced the Roadshow, and it's a project with the partners you can see on the screen. It's a European project funded by Horizon 2020, and this is the all-important resource that you can access. And as I said in the chat, the video that's being recorded will be made available through this website within a couple of days. Christina, who's in the background, being very quiet but working very hard, will make the video available for everybody. Right, so just to say now that the businesses will be getting support from the Space Hub networks. The idea of the Space Hubs network is to provide support to entrepreneurs who want to get involved in the space industry, or to more experienced companies that are already getting traction and they want to scale up. So any company that's involved in the space industry can get support from our project. We have over 70 mentors in the network. And the job of companies like mine and the job of the companies in the consortium is to match up the people who need the support with the mentors at the simplest level. Basically building bridges. So we all know that in Europe there are about 100 different incubators, accelerators, and business centers for space companies. And so what we do is to kind of be a glue that fills the gap. We advise companies how to get there, get the support. BIC, the Business Incubation Center, their projects through the Science Park GRAS, and we can get mentorship of those companies, and we can provide open doors for companies to get business support. 3 types of support, 3 types of programs. So for pre-incubation, so these are people with the great ideas, and I hope that this lunar economy has sparked some ideas. So the pre-incubation program is for people wanting to get involved, create a company. So we'll give you advice about what's realistic, what's not realistic, and where you can get help and support through the network. The second program is pre-acceleration. So that's really developing a viable product. The companies that have been around for a few years, they want to just get an MVP, so we can help companies do that. Last program, the one I look after, is a post-acceleration. So those are companies that are selling in the space industry and they want to grow. So they may be 20 people and they want to maybe scale up. So they want to get some funding, some VC funding. So that's why we help those companies. So all through the life cycle of space companies, we can provide support at the Space Hubs network. And what does it mean? So as you see on the screen, different hours of mentoring available. So 24 hours of experienced networks made available for those companies. And we have the name Space Hubs Network, as you can understand, means that there are different networks connecting together. So there are quite a lot of networks that are joining through the SUN program. So you can do in a 2-step process, access large networks of space experts. Right, so there we are. How to get in touch, onto the Space Hub network through the email or the website where the clip will be made available. I'm just going to check the latest Q&A. All right, digital twins. So okay, let's open up and talk about digital twins for a second. Carlos, Simon, if you'd like. Yeah.
What I just don't understand the question. I mean, I guess same applications as anything else. I mean, do you have in mind, Filippo, any specific application, or is the
maybe
question whether we see whether they make sense?
Yeah.
It makes sense to be used.
Planning the operation, maybe minimizing the risks and checking the feasibility of lunar operations through digital twins. I could think of that as one example.
Yeah, definitely, and for simulations, especially. I mean, digital twins or similar thing are used routinely. Every single rover that is sent to space has an equivalent on the ground, and when they have to perform any maintenance or any error or problem solving, they use the equivalent ground. Digital twins for simulations is something that we in our company are planning to use for our network. And it's being used as well in space traffic management, and the moon will be no exception.
Okay, excellent. Just there in the chat, the last line in the chat, everyone can see that. That's how you get in contact with the Space Hubs network if you want to join our open call. So that means if there are people out there with businesses that need support, that's your first line of contact, is to go through the Space Hubs network website. And we hope to see you. So I'd like to send out a real thanks to Simon Drake, Carlos, for an amazing level of knowledge there for the lunar economy, and I hope that we've answered the questions as well as possible. I mean, obviously, keep in touch, connect to us on LinkedIn, and we'd be very happy to keep things going with everybody out there. So, thank you to Cristiano as well for doing a great job. We can't see her, but we know she's there working hard.
Thank you very much.
There you are. You see, that's the proof. Yeah, that's the proof. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Simon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Yeah. Have a good day.